Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for clicking on the video for today. Several of you have asked about the river stage, and so I thought maybe I would just show it to you, give you an idea of what we're dealing with. Um, there's John Prine Park, sort of in the background there, and the curve into Muhlenberg, and then that's toward where the dam's supposed to be. So that's the look of it right now. I'm told that it's probably going to be, we could probably expect it to crest in about 3 days. I don't know. But this is where we are for now. And I thought today would be an opportunity for me to give you a little different view. We normally have a baptistry behind us. I don't think anybody wants to try this one, but nonetheless, I thought it would be a day that I could come out and do something a little different. Before we get into the sermon, I do want to make mention that if you happen to be in a situation where you can't get out, from what I understand, we're living island life right now. They're completely surrounded by water in Rochester. But if you're in a situation where you need something, if I can't get out to help you with it, I can find somebody who will, and so just let us know. I reach out to somebody if you need something. But I want to try to give you sort of a brief version of what I was going to share with you this morning in person. We're working our way toward Easter, and if you were with us last week, then you know that our focus was on the raising of Lazarus, and that's where we're going to kind of pick up today. Is Lazarus, that moment in Jesus' ministry was a pivotal moment, because when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, obviously there was a lot of commotion about that in the community, and everybody took notice, especially the Jewish leadership. And they at that point they'd sort of thrown up their hands and said, you know what, there's there's nothing we can do. Everything we do, Jesus seems to get bigger and more popular, and the crowds grow larger, and so they decided that the only thing they could do was actually to put him to death, and not only him but Lazarus. They knew as long as Lazarus was walking around, there would be no the crowd wouldn't quiet, because as long as that evidence was walking around, then Jesus' following was still going to grow. So they began to plot to take his life, and at that point Jesus could no longer walk around in Jerusalem. It just wasn't safe. He had to get out of town. And so the story we're going to look at today actually is where Jesus is on his way out of town. They're going to Capernaum. He's with his disciples, and as they're walking, they are having a conversation behind Jesus. And whenever they get to Capernaum, Jesus says, hey guys, what were you talking about? And they all were silent, because they were all embarrassed about what they were talking about, because they'd been talking about who was going to be greatest in the kingdom. When Jesus came into power, and they were still thinking in terms of just an earthly kingdom. They're thinking, when Jesus is in power, who of us is going to be the greatest? And Jesus begins to teach them at that point that they have the wrong mindset, that they're going about things the wrong way. They're misunderstanding what it is to be great in the kingdom of God. And Jesus uses an example. You may remember when he pulls a little child up and sets him in the middle of the crowd, and Jesus is saying, whatever you do to the least of these, and keep in mind that today we sort of elevate kids in our society, but in Jesus' society, or in the first century, I should say, children were not elevated the way they are in our culture today. They were really the lowest rung of the social ladder, and so Jesus is saying, and no matter where someone comes from in their social class, whatever you do to them, you're doing to me. And so he tries to teach them this lesson of what it means to be great, but it's not sinking in. And the reason we know it's not sinking in is because that's Mark chapter 9, but in Mark chapter 10, he's still having to teach the same lesson. And that's, I'm going to pull a couple of verses from Mark chapter 10 here in just a second, but I want to give you the context of it. James and John, sons of Zebedee, in chapter 10, come to Jesus to ask him a question. And in the Gospel of Matthew tells us that actually they brought their mother with them, and their mother, they used her as a pawn, and they sort of had her ask the question. But in Mark's account, it says that they asked Jesus, could we ask you a question? Will you just go ahead and say yes before we ask the question? And Jesus isn't going for that. So he asks them, what is it that you're wanting? And they say, well, we want to be on your right and left when you come into your glory, or when you come into your kingdom, right? Again, they're thinking earthly kingdom. We want to be on your right and your left. And Jesus explains to them that they're asking something they don't understand. They don't understand what they're asking. And he begins to talk about, will you be able to be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with, and drink from the cup that I'll drink from? And Jesus is speaking figuratively. He's actually talking about, when he says baptism, I believe he's talking about his death. And when he talks about the cup that he'll drink, he's talking about his suffering. And so he's saying to them, you can't do what I'm about to do. But they don't, again, they're thinking earthly kingdom. They're thinking, well, yeah, we can do the baptism, whatever cup you have, we'll be glad to drink that, because they think he's going to come into an earthly kingdom. And they just don't get it. And as this plays out, the other disciples begin to get angry. And they're angry not so much because James and John, I think, not so much because James and John are asking this question, but because they're asking it before the rest of them could, right? And so that's where we come into our text today. Jesus, seeing all of this, he responds to them, and he does it by sensing. He senses all this stuff's going on, this frustration. And so in chapter 10, verse 42 of Mark, Jesus called them over to him and said, now keep in mind, he's said this before, but this time he's going to offer sort of a comparison for them. He wants them to see what he's trying to teach. He says, Jesus called them over and said to them, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their men of high positions act as tyrants over them. In other words, they use their power to suffocate people. They use their power to suppress people and get their thumbs on to hold people down. You know how they work, Jesus says. You've been around the Gentiles. You know how it works. But then he drops this statement that is so revolutionary. I mean, he says in verse 43, but it is not so among you. He's talking to his closest followers, but I think he's talking to you and me too. He says, it is not so among you. If you're a Jesus follower, you don't get a choice. You don't get to handle greatness that way, right? If you're not a Jesus follower, go ahead, do it the way Gentiles do it. But as long as you're a Jesus follower, you're not allowed to do it that way. And then he goes on to say, on the contrary. So here's what you're supposed to do. Whoever wants to become great among you. Now let me pause there for a second, because I think this is important to notice too. Jesus doesn't fault them for wanting to become great. He doesn't say, how dare you, want to be great. He recognizes that that's a desire, that's a genuine desire in people is for greatness. They want to be great. They want to do important things. But then he goes on to define what greatness is. He says, on the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be slave to all. You want to be great? That's fine. That's good, Jesus would say. But then he gives us a new way to do that. He explains that the goal is not to climb the ladder so that you can be the most important and the most powerful, but rather it's to get beneath somebody else. The greatness is not something that you step up into. It's something that you step down into. You descend into greatness. It's not that the people that are around you are there for you. That's sort of the hierarchy that we think about. Whoever's at the top and everybody that is below them or whatever is there for them. No, Jesus says the great ones are the ones that get down beneath everybody else. And the great people are there for everybody else. How do you use what you have? How much wealth you have? How much influence you have? How much power you have? How much popularity you have? How do you use it for the benefit of other people? So it's not about what you have or the abilities that you have. It's what you do with what you've been given. How you use it. How you use that time. How you use that stuff, that resource, that talent, that energy, that time. How are you serving other people? Are you using your gifts to make a difference? I really believe, and you've heard me say this before, that we're all wired to give. We're all wired to serve. We're all wired for ministry. Nobody, I just don't believe, I don't believe anybody is saved just to hold down a chair, right? We all have a calling. We all have something that we're supposed to do. And when I think about our church, when I think about Richland, I see so much potential for growth. I see so much opportunity for us to be great in our community. But it's going to require that each individual decide that they're going to be great according to Jesus' standards. I remember when I worked at Lifeway, there was a sign over the break room door. It said "Moment of Truth," and it defined a moment of truth as a never-to-be-repeated opportunity to make a difference that only you can make. I think throughout our lives and throughout Christian ministry, there are moments of truth. Moments of truth wherein if we would respond the way Jesus tells his disciples they're supposed to respond, if we would look for an opportunity to use what we've been given to do something for the people around us, I really think that if we would all approach moments of truth in that way, that we have a never-to-be-repeated opportunity to make a difference that only we can make, that we would see growth like we've never seen before. And that's part of the reason why I'm so excited about our Easter services, because I think, as we grow spiritually, we begin to look for opportunities to do what Jesus is telling his disciples they're supposed to do. We begin to look for opportunities to be great in our community by serving the people around us. And when I say community, I'm talking about our church family. I'm talking about the people who live around our building, the people we work with. I think if we ever begin to grow as individuals spiritually, and we ever engage in ministry as individuals, then we see spiritual growth in our church. Then we see engagement among our church family and by our church family with the people around us. So that's my challenge for you today. Look for moments of truth, right? Look for moments to be great, not by Gentile standards, not by the world standards, but by Jesus standards. Look for opportunities to use the gifts that God has given you to do ministry in his name. And we want to help you with that at Richland. And if you're looking for a way to get connected, we hope that you'll let us know, and we would love to be able to connect you and show you an opportunity. And we look forward to that opportunity. Again, thank you so much for watching the video today, and hopefully we'll see you on Wednesday, if not next Sunday. Thanks a lot.